72 years old, and the last thing I expected to feel on a Friday night in December was the Cincinnati wind cutting through my coat like it had a personal grudge. But there I was, standing on the front porch of the house I paid off, all 4 bedrooms, the oak floors, the new water heater I installed 6 months ago with these same arthritic hands, watching my son Edwards close the door in my face like I was a Jehovah's Witness he didn't have time for. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The snow wasn't falling, it was attacking. Dad, that was the last word he said to me before the door clicked shut. Not I'm sorry. Not I'll call you tomorrow. Just Dad. Like my name was an inconvenience. Like I was a footnote he was skipping over. I didn't know it yet. But that door closing was the best thing that ever happened to me. Let me back up 20 minutes, because you need the full picture before you decide who the villain is in this story. Spoiler, it isn't me. We'd been living in the Westwood neighborhood of Cincinnati for 3 years, Edwards and his wife Hazel and me. It was supposed to be temporary, just until my knees got better after the surgery. That was the arrangement. That was what we agreed on. Hazel had a different arrangement in her head, apparently. I'd seen it building for months. The way she'd sigh when I came into the kitchen. The way she'd accidentally use my chair at the dining table, then look at me like I was confused for expecting to sit in it. Little things. Paper cuts dressed up as hospitality. But that Friday, December 9th, a Wednesday would have been too poetic. She finally stopped disguising it. I was in my room, the small one off the hallway that used to be a storage closet before Edwards cleaned it out for me, when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The walls in that house are thin as excuses. He's not even sick, Edwards. Hazel's voice had that practiced edge to it, calm enough to sound reasonable, sharp enough to draw blood. He walks around here like it's his house. It was his house, Hazel. Was. Past tense. We're the ones making the payments now. I made 2 years of payments on that house before I handed Edwards the deed. But sure. Past tense. I sat on the edge of my bed listening to my daughter-in-law dismantle 40 years of my life in about 11 minutes. She was good. I'll give her that. She had a whole presentation. I half expected a PowerPoint. The Medicare costs. The grocery bill. The way I took over the living room. The fact that I had opinions about how she raised her kids. For the record, I mentioned once that the boys probably shouldn't eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. Once. He needs to go. Edwards, he has options. He's 72. Plenty of people his age live independently. She paused. Or there are facilities. Facilities. The word landed in my chest like a stone in still water. She meant a nursing home. She'd been researching nursing homes. My daughter-in-law had been on the internet, quietly building a case for where to warehouse me, like I was furniture she needed to donate before it took up too much space. I stood up, put on my coat. That old brown One Violet bought me back in 2003 from a shop on Reading Road that's been a vape store for years now. I didn't plan what happened next. I just moved. I walked out of that closet bedroom, down the hall, past the family photos on the wall, photos that included me, by the way, smiling like an idiot who didn't see any of this coming, and into the kitchen. Hazel went quiet when she saw me. Edwards looked at the floor. I heard enough, I said. No dramatics. No shaking voice. I'll get out of your way. Dad, don't. I held up a hand. I'm not doing the part where you apologize and we pretend she didn't say what she said. I'm too old for that scene. Hazel lifted her chin. McCall, nobody's asking you to. Hazel. I looked at her steady. You've been asking me to leave since Labor Day. I'm just finally listening. I went back to my room, grabbed the go bag I'd kept packed for 15 years, old habit from a life I never told Edwards about, and walked to the front door. That's when Hazel said it. I want you to remember she said it. Because I certainly did. Get out, you useless burden. Not a whisper, not something she could walk back and blame on stress. Full volume, like she'd been saving it. Edwards said nothing. I opened the front door and walked into the Cincinnati winter like it was a Friday. Because it was. The Westwood streets at 9 p.m. in December are not a place a 72-year-old man with bad knees should be standing. Let me tell you. The neighborhood was quiet, the Christmas lights on the porches doing their cheerful best while I stood on the sidewalk wondering what exactly my next move was. I had a next move. I always had a next move. I just hadn't planned on needing it tonight. I started walking west on Montana Avenue, toward the community center on the corner of Boudinot. Not because I had a plan, because my feet knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. My phone buzzed. Edwards. I stared at the name on the screen. Let it ring. 2 blocks later, the cold hit different. My left knee, the bad one, locked up on a patch of ice outside the old barber shop, and I went down. Not all the way. I caught myself on a parked car, but hard enough. I stood there for a minute, breathing steam into the dark, snow landing on my shoulders. Here's the thing about being old that nobody in their 30s understands yet. It's not the big losses that wear you down. It's the small indignities. It's the moment you realize your own body has started agreeing with the people who think you're done. I pulled out my phone, not to call Edwards, not to call anyone who'd make me explain myself tonight. I dialed Ramirez, Officer Dante Ramirez, 23 years on the Cincinnati PD. He'd been the first cop on scene when Violet died, back in '94, a December just like this one. He brought me coffee, stayed until the sun came up, never asked me anything I didn't want to answer. He owed me nothing. But somehow, over 30 years, that man had become the person I called when the world stopped making sense. McCall. He picked up on the second ring. It's 10 o'clock. 9:43, I corrected. A pause. Where are you? Montana and Boudinot. I fell a little. You fell. Not all the way. Mostly my knee gave a throb that rewrote the sentence for me. Ramirez. I might need a minute here. I heard him already moving. Keys jingling. Door opening. I didn't know it yet, but in about 4 hours Edwards would be getting a phone call. And everything Hazel thought she'd buried, everything I'd spent 30 years building in silence, was about to walk into the light. Stay on the line, Ramirez said. Don't move. The snow kept falling on Boudinot Avenue, and somewhere, 30 years of secrets were about to stop being secret. There's a particular kind of cold that only Cincinnati delivers in December, the kind that doesn't just chill you, it interrogates you. Sitting on the hood of a stranger's parked Buick on Boudinot Avenue, my bad knee throbbing like a metronome set to misery, I had plenty of time to let that cold ask its questions. Why didn't you tell him, McCall? 30 years. 30 years of Tuesday night foundation meetings, of quietly redirecting money, of building something in Violet's name while Edwards thought I was just a tired old man watching the History Channel and clipping coupons. 30 years of keeping the biggest thing I'd ever done completely invisible to the one person who should have known, because he would have made it about him, or Hazel would have made it about money, and Violet deserved better than that. Ramirez pulled up in 11 minutes. I counted. His department issue Ford looked like a spaceship in all that snow, the headlights cutting through the dark on Boudinot like God finally decided to answer a message I'd sent 3 hours ago. He stepped out without the lights on. Ramirez never liked spectacle. In 2003 years of Cincinnati PD, the man had solved problems the way a good surgeon operates, quietly, precisely, and without an audience. He looked at me on that Buick hood and had the audacity to almost smile. You look terrible, he said. I've looked worse. Yeah. He walked over, assessed my knee with a quick look, didn't touch it. 1994 comes to mind. That landed somewhere deep. December 1994, the night Violet died. I'd looked considerably worse that night, sitting in a hospital hallway in Clifton, still wearing my work clothes from the factory, unable to form a sentence that made any sense. Can you walk? Ramirez asked. I walked 2 blocks in a blizzard with a bad knee and my dignity mostly intact. Yes, I can walk. Mostly intact, he repeated. Don't push it. He helped me to the car anyway. Not because I needed it. Well, not entirely. But because Ramirez was the kind of man who understood the difference between helping someone and humiliating them. He helped me like a partner, not a nurse. Hand on the elbow, steady pressure, no commentary. I settled into the passenger seat and he cranked the heat without asking. I didn't know it yet, but about 2 miles from where we were sitting, something was already happening at the Westwood Community Center on Boudinot that would make every decision I'd ever quietly made feel like it was building toward this exact Friday night. You want to tell me what happened? Ramirez said, pulling out onto Montana. Hazel happened. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's heard a name used as a diagnosis before. She finally did it. No hesitation, like she'd been rehearsing. Ramirez's jaw tightened, just slightly. And Edwards? I looked out the window at the snow burying Westwood 1 inch at a time. Edwards stood there, I said, like a man watching a car accident that he'd already decided wasn't his problem. The silence in that car had weight to it. Where do you want to go, McCall? And here's where I should have said a hotel, or my attorney's office on Erie Avenue, or literally anywhere that wasn't about to turn my quiet, carefully constructed secret life into a Cincinnati news segment. Just drive, I said. I need 10 minutes to think. Ramirez drove. That was one of his gifts. The man could be present without being loud about it. We moved through Westwood in the snow, past the barber shop, past the church on Epworth, past the little Dominican place on the corner that made the rice I'd been eating every Sunday for 12 years. And then Ramirez slowed down. McCall, I see it. The Westwood Community Center, the one that sat on the corner of Boudinot and Epworth, the one whose HVAC system I'd personally funded in 2019 because the kids were wearing coats indoors, was lit up like it was Easter Sunday. Cars lined both sides of the street. People stood outside in the snow. Not a handful of people. Hundreds of people. Coats and scarves and candles cupped against the wind. Standing in the parking lot and spilling onto the sidewalk, a silent crowd in the middle of a Friday night blizzard that had absolutely no business being there. I stared. When did you... I started. I made a call, Ramirez said quietly. When you called me, I made a call. Ramirez, you built that place, McCall. His voice had that careful evenness it got when he was holding something in. You built half of this neighborhood. You think I was going to let you sit on a car hood in the snow and not tell somebody? I wanted to be angry. I genuinely tried to manufacture some indignation. But the truth was, sitting in that warm car, looking at hundreds of people standing in the cold holding candles for a man they thought was in trouble, I couldn't find a single ounce of anger. Who did you call? I said finally. Deacon Morrison at first. Then it got away from me. Got away from you. These things have a way. He paused. There are 2 news vans, McCall. I want you to be prepared. Muse. I turned to look at him. Ramirez. I'm in a 30-year-old coat. It's a good coat. It is a good coat, I admitted. Violet picked it. That name. It always did something to the air when I said it out loud. Ramirez knew that. He let it settle. They know about the foundation? I asked. The neighborhood's always known about the foundation, McCall. Everybody knew but Edwards. That truth sat in my chest like a warm coal. Everybody knew but Edwards. I'd spent 3 decades protecting a secret from my own son, while an entire zip code quietly held it for me. Getting me inside took some doing. Ramirez wanted to call for medical. My knee had swollen enough that walking was a negotiation, but I waved him off. There was no version of this moment that included me being wheeled in on a stretcher. Not tonight. I walked in, slowly, with Ramirez at my left shoulder and my old brown coat doing the best it could. The room went quiet when the door opened. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The other kind. The kind a room gets when it's been holding its breath and something finally gives it permission to exhale. I recognized faces immediately. Paulette from the after-school program on Work Road. Old Donald who ran the reading circle on Thursday nights. The 3 women from the Violet Donovan Scholarship Committee who sent me handwritten thank you notes every June without fail. Teachers, parents, teenagers who didn't know me, but had been brought by people who did. And then someone started clapping. I'm not going to pretend I handled that with dignity. I'm 72 years old. I'd just been thrown out of my own house by my daughter-in-law. My knee was the size of a cantaloupe, and a room full of people who knew my dead wife's name were applauding me in the middle of a blizzard. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Old trick. Keeps things from spilling over. All right, I said, loud enough to carry. All right, now. Everybody go home before you catch pneumonia. Violet would be furious with every single one of you. Laughter. Real laughter. The kind that breaks tension like a window. They sat me down in the back office. Ramirez and Paulette between them got me into a chair with my leg elevated, and somebody produced coffee that was strong enough to file taxes, while outside the crowd slowly, reluctantly, began to filter back into the snow. The news cameras stayed. I didn't know it yet, but 14 miles across Cincinnati in a house on Maplewood Avenue in Westwood, a television was on. And a woman named Hazel was watching the 11 o'clock news with the specific expression of a person whose carefully constructed reality is beginning to crack. Ramirez stepped back into the office and closed the door. He had his phone in his hand. He's on his way, he said. I looked up. You called Edwards. I called Edwards. I breathed out slowly through my nose. What exactly did you tell him? I told him his father was found semi-conscious in the snow on Boudinot Avenue and that he needed to come to the community center immediately. Ramirez paused. I may have left out several other details. Several. Most of them. I looked at my coffee. Good man, Ramirez. Genuinely good man. How long? I asked. 20 minutes. Maybe 15 if he runs lights. 15 if he panicked. I sat back in that chair in the back office of the building that carried my wife's name on the outside wall, in letters 3 feet tall. Letters Edwards had somehow never driven past slowly enough to read. And I thought about what I was going to say to my son. Here's what I came up with. Nothing. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish him, but because some things, when the time finally comes, don't need words. Some things explain themselves. Outside the office door, I could hear the news crews setting up. I could hear Paulette talking to someone, her voice steady and proud, saying words like 30 years and 14 schools, and 3 states. I could hear the building itself, the floors I'd refinished, the roof I'd replaced, the gymnasium I'd funded in 2011, breathing around me like it knew something was coming. On the wall directly across from where I sat, through the office's small interior window, I could see the edge of it, the portrait, Violet. Painted by a local artist in 2018, commissioned anonymously, by me, obviously, 6 feet tall and framed in dark mahogany. She was laughing in it, which is how I always remembered her. Not the last months, not the hospital, not December 1994. Before all that, young and laughing, in the yellow dress she wore the summer Edwards was born. Beneath her portrait, in letters I'd chosen myself, carved directly into the wall. Built by Raymond, in love, in silence, forever. McCall, I'd used the name Raymond as a nod to my own father. It was the name I signed on every foundation document for 30 years. The name Westwood knew. The name my son had never once heard me use. Until tonight. I heard the front door of the community center open. I heard the crowd that had gathered, those who hadn't left, those who were never going to leave until they knew I was okay, go quiet again. I heard footsteps, fast ones, and I picked up my coffee cup and I waited. Footsteps have personalities, if you know how to listen. Violet used to say that. She could tell my mood by how I walked down the hallway, whether I was tired or troubled, or trying to pretend I wasn't either. 30 years later, standing in that office with a bad knee and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, I heard my son's footsteps crossing the community center floor, and I knew exactly what they sounded like. Panic. Not grief. Not guilt. Panic. The footsteps of a man who'd been told his father was found semi-conscious in a snowstorm and had spent the entire drive over-calculating what that meant for him. I knew my son. I'd made my son. I knew the difference between his worried walk and his scared walk, and what was coming through that door wasn't worried. It was scared of consequences. I didn't move. I just sat there with my lukewarm coffee and waited for the man I raised to walk into the truth I'd built. The office door swung open. Edwards filled the frame. He got that from me. The broad shoulders, the way he takes up a doorway. And for exactly 3 seconds, he looked at me with the expression of a man who'd been preparing a speech the whole drive over. Then his eyes moved past me, through the interior window, to the portrait. The speech evaporated. I watched it happen in real time, watched the words drain right out of him, watched his face do that thing faces do when the world reorganizes itself without asking permission. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hand was still on the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright. Dad. It came out wrong. Thin, like a question that didn't know what it was asking. Edwards. I kept my voice level. The way you keep a table level when one leg is shorter. Constant, quiet adjustment. Sit down before you fall down. He didn't sit. He stepped into the office slowly, like the floor might give way. His eyes pulling back to the window, back to Violet's portrait, back to me. Back to the portrait, the yellow dress, the laugh, the letters carved into the wall beneath her. Built by Raymond. In love. In silence. Forever. That's... He stopped. Swallowed. That's Mom. Dad. On the wall. That's... He pressed his fingers to his mouth for a second. How long has she been on that wall? Since 2018. He blinked. 2018. October. They unveiled it on her birthday. Nice ceremony. Good weather for October. The blinking continued. I could see him doing math he wasn't prepared to do. You put her there? I funded the portrait, yes. You funded. He stopped again. Started again. Dad, what is this place? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting 30 years to answer, and had somehow always managed to sidestep. Not with lies. I want to be clear about that. I never lied to Edwards. I just never handed him the full picture. There's a difference. A thin one, maybe. But it's there. I set my coffee down on the desk beside me, folded my hands. Sit down, Edwards. This time he sat. In the chair across from me, the one Paulette used during foundation budget meetings, the one that had held teachers and principals and city council members over the years. My son sat in it like it was a witness stand. The Violet Donovan Community Foundation, I said, incorporated December 1995, 1 year after your mother died. He said nothing. 14 schools funded across Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, after-school programs in 6 Cincinnati zip codes, scholarship funds that have sent, as of last June, 231 kids to college. Kids who grew up in neighborhoods like this one. Kids who didn't have what you had. I watched his face. This building, I continued, was purchased in 2001 with foundation money. Roof replaced in 2009. Gymnasium added 2011. HVAC system, full replacement, 2019. Because the children in the after-school program were wearing their coats inside, and I have a thing about that. Edwards hadn't blinked in what felt like a full minute. The name on the foundation documents, I said, is Raymond. My father's name. I used it because I didn't want... I paused, chose carefully. I didn't want it to become something other than what it was. It wasn't about credit. It was about Violet. The silence in that small office was the loudest thing I'd heard all night, and I'd been thrown into a Cincinnati blizzard 3 hours ago. Dad? His voice had changed. The panic was gone. Something rawer had moved in. How? Where did the money come from? You worked at the factory for 31 years. Yes. I shifted my leg carefully. What I never told you, what I didn't see the need to tell you frankly, was that your grandfather left me a significant amount when he passed in 1993. Not a fortune, but significant. I put it in a trust the year after Violet died, and I never touched a dollar of it personally. I met his eyes. Not $1, Edwards. It was always hers. It was always for this. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and put his face in his hands. I let him have that. Outside the office, I could hear the building, Paulette's voice, low and steady, talking to the news crew. The shuffle of the last few dozen people who'd refused to go home until they knew I was all right. Somewhere out there, a camera was rolling, and a reporter was getting the kind of story that doesn't come along often. The kind where the truth is so much better than anything you could invent. I didn't know it yet, but 14 miles away, Hazel was having a completely different kind of evening. Why didn't you tell me? Edward said finally. He looked up. His eyes were red. 30 years, Dad. I thought you just watched the History Channel and clipped coupons. He winced. Hard. Because you would have told Hazel, I said, simply, directly. The way you say things when you're too old and too cold and too tired for the scenic route. And Hazel would have made it a conversation about assets and inheritance and what's owed to whom. And this, I gestured toward the window, toward Violet's portrait, toward all of it. This was never about assets, son. This was about the woman who made you possible. This was about doing right by her when I couldn't do anything else. His jaw worked. She deserved a monument, I said quietly. I built her one. I just built it where people could actually use it. Edward stood up. Slowly, he walked to the interior window and stood there looking at his mother's portrait. The yellow dress, the laugh, that laugh that used to fill our house on Maplewood like weather. And I watched my son see his mother for the first time in the way I'd always seen her. Not as a memory, as a legacy. His shoulders shook once. He kept his back to me, which I respected. Men of his generation didn't love being seen falling apart. I understood that. I'd raised him with some of my own worst habits. She'd have hated this, he said, his voice rough. The portrait. The fuss. She'd have been mortified. Then she'd have cried about it privately and never admitted it. He made a sound, half laugh, half something else, that I hadn't heard from him since he was about 9 years old. And in that sound, I heard my son. Not Hazel's husband, not the man who'd stood silent in the kitchen while my dignity was auctioned off. My son. The kid who used to fall asleep on Violet's lap during thunderstorms and pretended in the morning that he hadn't. He turned around. Dad. What Hazel said tonight. I'm not doing that conversation tonight. Tonight I'm sitting here with a bad knee and a lukewarm coffee and the full intention of accepting exactly one apology, which will be yours, and then sleeping somewhere warm. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. No preamble. No qualifications. I'm sorry I let her say that. I'm sorry I didn't. I should have. I let that sit exactly as long as it needed to. Ramirez knows somewhere I can stay tonight, I asked. You'll stay with? I won't be staying at the house, Edwards. He absorbed that. Right. He pulled out his phone, and his face changed again, the way it does when someone checks a screen and finds something they weren't ready for. He turned the phone toward me. 17 missed calls. Hazel's mother. Hazel's sister. 3 numbers he didn't recognize. And at the top, a text from Hazel herself. That read, and I'm quoting directly because I asked him to read it to me twice to make sure I had it right. They're saying on the news he built the whole community center. They're saying he's been funding schools for 30 years. Edwards, my mother just called me. My sister just called me. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like. I said nothing. This was the part where I was supposed to feel something triumphant, some hot flush of vindication. Hazel, who had stood in her kitchen and called me a useless burden, with the confidence of a woman who'd done her research, was now watching the 11 o'clock news learn exactly how wrong her research was. What I actually felt was tired and old, and a little bit sad that it had taken a snowstorm to get my son to look at me clearly. But underneath all of that, quiet and warm and stubborn as Violet herself, was something that felt a lot like peace. Come here, I said to Edwards. He walked over, stood next to my chair. I reached up and put my hand on his arm, the way I used to when he was small and needed reminding that the world wasn't ending. Your mother would have loved what this place became, I said. And she would have loved you anyway. She always did. You made that harder than it needed to be tonight, but I patted his arm once. She'd have loved you anyway. He put his hand over mine and didn't say anything. Good. Some things don't need words. I'd learned that from 30 years of doing the most important thing I ever did in absolute silence. Ramirez appeared in the doorway a moment later, reading the room the way only a 23-year veteran of the CPD can. One sweep, total assessment, no unnecessary questions. There's a reporter who'd like to speak with you, he said to me. Tell her give me 5 minutes. Him. Tell him give me 5 minutes. Ramirez nodded and pulled the door half closed behind him. I looked at Edwards. He looked at me. Outside, through the community center's tall front windows, the snow was still falling on Westwood, on Boudinot and Epworth, on Montana Avenue, on the porch of the house I'd paid off and signed over, and been thrown out of all in the same lifetime. On 14 schools across 3 states where kids were sleeping tonight who didn't know my name but were living inside something I'd built. On a portrait of a woman in a yellow dress laughing, forever. Violet. I picked up my lukewarm coffee, finished it. Then I set the cup down and looked at my son. There's something else. I said, sit back down. Edward sat. I reached into my go bag, the one I'd packed 15 years ago for exactly this kind of emergency, and set a manila envelope on the desk between us, thick, rubber-banded, my attorney's return address in the corner. What is that? Edwards asked. That is my updated will, signed and filed 3 weeks ago. I watched his face. The house on Maplewood, the one I paid off, the one I handed you the deed to. I've retitled it. Back into the foundation's name. It'll become transitional housing for families in the after-school program. The color left his face. Dad, Hazel called it a burden, I said. I'm making sure it becomes one. For 30 families who actually need it. Both of us looked at it. Hazel. Again. By now she would have seen the news. By now her mother, her sister, every neighbor on that street would have seen it too. The woman who called me a useless burden was watching the 11 o'clock news, discovered that her useless burden had quietly funded half the city, while she was busy researching nursing homes. I hoped she was watching it on the television in the living room. My living room. The one she said I took over. The house, Edwards. I let it land. She has 60 days to vacate. That's in the paperwork. My attorney sent it this afternoon. Edwards stared at me for a long moment. He looked like a man standing in a house that had just shifted 6 inches to the left, everything familiar, nothing where he left it. What about me? He asked quietly. I looked at my son, my boy, the one I'd carried on my shoulders, and taught to ride a bike on the same Westwood streets now buried in snow. The one who had stood silent in a kitchen while a woman called his father a useless burden. You, I said, have a choice to make, and you have about 60 days to make it. I stood up then, slowly. My bad knee protested every inch of it, and I did not care. Outside the office door, I could hear the reporter asking Paulette how long the foundation had operated. I could hear her answer. 30 years. And the silence that followed it, the particular silence of someone revising everything they thought they understood about a story. I understood that silence. I'd been the story everyone was revising all night. Ramirez appeared in the doorway again. He read the room. He looked at the envelope on the desk. He looked at Edwards. He looked at me. "Ready?" he asked me. 1 minute. I turned back to Edwards. He hadn't moved. The envelope sat between us like a verdict. I am not a burden. I never was. And the next person who builds a life on my foundation while calling me useless, I picked up my go bag, is going to find out what this family is actually worth, and none of it will be left to them. I walked past him, through the door, and out into the community center. The reporter was waiting near the front entrance, young, serious, the camera behind him still rolling. Paulette stood to the side with the quiet pride of a woman who has known a secret for 30 years and is finally allowed to stop keeping it. I walked over, my bad knee and my old brown coat, and all 30 years of silence walking with me, and I stood in front of that camera. Somewhere across Cincinnati on a television in a living room I used to own, a woman named Hazel was about to watch the 11 o'clock news introduce the useless burden she'd just thrown into a snowstorm. I hoped she was sitting in my chair. "Mr. Donovan," the reporter said, "can you tell us about the foundation?" I looked straight into the camera. 72 years old. One bad knee. An old brown coat Violet bought me in 2003. Not a single dollar of my own money spent on any of it, because every dollar was always hers. "It's a love story," I said. "Been going on 30 years. Started the night my wife died, and it hasn't stopped yet." Behind me, through the office door I'd left open, I heard a sound. Edwards. Crying. Not the polished kind. The kind a man does when he finally understands the size of what he almost lost. Good. Let him cry. Some lessons have to cost something before they stick. Violet would have agreed with me. She always did, in the end. The snow kept falling on Westwood. The camera kept rolling. And somewhere under 6 feet of laughing portrait and 30 years of silence, a woman in a yellow dress was finally fully irreversibly known. That was enough. That was more than enough. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.